Good evening, everybody. This is Three Deep with Wobby, and to a much lesser extent, me, Joe Johnson, for Wednesday, the 18th of November. We've been off for a couple of weeks. I think that we picked a perfect time to re-pick up the show because things are like night and day from the last time that we talked, at least on air, Mister Wabi. But how have you been, man? How are you holding up?
It's I'm good. No, I'm good. It's that happens though in the NFL, as our guest tonight will be able to explain even better than we can. This is a week-to-week league, so if you haven't checked in or talked to someone about the league in 3 weeks, it's basically a different world in many respects when you're talking about the NFL in a 3-week break, because this is certainly a week-to-week league, and I think we've seen that with the Vikings this season. I mean, a month ago, people were talking about many different things than they're talking about now with the Vikings, and that's because this is a week-to-week league.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, we do have a special guest. The show is still relatively new, so for the new people listening, basically the crux of it, the show Three Deep, it's me, Wobby, and then a special guest each week, or maybe a special guest or two. Tonight we have an amazing guest, one who doesn't really need an introduction, but I'll give him one anyway, Mr. Matt Birk, Vikings legend, in my opinion, the NFL center of the decade for the aughts. I don't care what anyone says. Um, Six-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, all-around good guy, plyometrics master. Thanks for joining the show, Matt. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you and legend in his own right, Wabi.
In his own mind, you mean?
Yeah,
Uh,
that works too.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's nice of you to say, Matt. I appreciate that. Hey, Joe said something that kind of got me thinking right there when he was introducing you. He called you maybe the center of the aughts. Um, like, who were some of the top centers who played in the league in your era? I think we had one in the division who you and I saw twice a year. Olin Kreutz was pretty good, right? He
yeah.
played at the same time you did. Who were some of the other centers maybe who played at the same time you did, who you'd put up there at the top of the list?
Definitely Olin, Jeff Saturday from
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis, Kevin Mawai. Kevin played a long time, and for the second half of his career was in the aughts.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the guys that I think we were all sort of watching each other from afar, and had a good, healthy competition. Just I always want to see how was whenever we played the Bears, or if we were playing, say, the Packers, I'd want to watch the Bears film to see how Olin was playing that year. And I mean, NFL players, I guess, always have a special bond, and you always see after a game the cameras always show the quarterbacks shaking hands, obviously, which is great. But same bond exists for centers. There's a center on the field. There's only one guy that knows what it's like to bend over and have another guy put his hands in between your legs. And so, we always like to go over and dap each other up after the game and see how things are going.
Yeah.
As a guy who didn't play center in college and who converted after you were drafted, how hard is that? I look at guys like Pat Elflein, who was released this week and who was moved, through his own volition or otherwise from obviously center to right guard or to left guard, then over to right guard for half of a game. And some people thought that it wasn't the best move to get rid of him for depth purposes, but I always wonder, looking at guys like that or TJ Clemmings, who they tried at basically every position on the line, how hard that is mentally when you're so used to, from a muscle memory standpoint, playing a completely different position.
There's obviously some difference, but a lot of it is carry over as well. I think if you can play center, the advantage that you have that carries over to the other positions for sure is you have to know the whole offense. So you'll kind of know, you'll have the big picture. Whereas I think a lot of times guys, particularly tackles, if I could pigeonhole those guys, a lot of tackles, they just know, just block the guy in front of them. And, typically they're really, really good at being out on that island and one-on-one blocking a guy. But center, you kind of have the whole picture of the play. And so I think that's helpful. But physically, center is different than the other positions. You don't, you're obviously right up on the ball. Usually there's a nose tackle about 3 inches from your face. So there's not a lot of space. And then a lot of times in pass pro, you're not locked up one-on-one. You most times you're not going to be on that island. So yeah, it's different, but it's the same too. And I would just say, hey, look, if you're like a super talented guy, they can plug you in at a position and you're just going to play there for 10 years and that's it. But most guys in the NFL, that's not the case. You got to be able to be ambidextrous, or as we used to call it amphibious. You got to be able to play both sides. And you just got to be able to do it, because most guys don't come into the league and are just bona fide starters. You have to show versatility. If you're a backup, you definitely have to play more than one position, because you're only dressing 7, maybe 8 linemen. So you got to be a swing guy, or you got to play guard and tackle. And that just goes with the job description of being an NFL offensive lineman.
Definitely. From you, sorry, Wobby, were you gonna follow up on that, or?
Well, yeah, and I think it's such a competitive sport and competitive league, and this might happen with the quarterback, it might happen with a receiver or a corner, but there's so many examples, I think, Matt, of guys who played the game at a really high level in high school, were the best player on their team. Maybe the same thing is said about them in college. You get to the pros, you don't know. You might not play. Yeah, you played left guard in high school and college, but you might not play left guard at the pros, and you might not play corner at the pros. You might be a safety. You might not be a Mike linebacker in the pros. You might be a Will. You know what I mean? It's so competitive. You don't. There's very few guys, I think, who have a preconceived notion of what they're going to be, and then they play that out for the remainder of their career. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, you're right. I mean, there's 22 starting spots, but there's 53 guys on a roster. So if you're a backup, you have to back up more than one position, maybe unless you're a quarterback. You're gonna have to play some special teams. So I think the guys that have enough humility when they come into the league to realize, hey, I got to do whatever it takes. Maybe it's a backup, maybe it's covering kicks, whatever, to make this team. And I also have to. I don't know if anybody. Very, very few guys are NFL ready day one. So you got to come in knowing that, hey, this is going to be a struggle. I'm going to get my butt kicked for a while, and I'm just going to have to take coaching. I'm going to have to study, really, really learn how to be a pro, and study my playbooks, really study my technique. I mean, I can say honestly, in high school and college, because I didn't go to a big time college, I could just get by mostly on being bigger and stronger than everybody else. And technique wasn't really all that important. But in the NFL, you have to have technique. Everybody's big and strong and fast. And every single day, whether you're a rookie or whether you play 15 years, every single day you have to work that technique over and over and over.
Yep. I remember Matt, when my first year with the Vikings was 2005, and you, by that time, were sort of entrenched, and you were a regular member of the squad, and you were a leader. Like, who would you point to as guys who, when you came in, were guys that you looked up to, or that you sort of tried to fit in with, or I see him doing that, I'm going to do that too?
Yeah, well, I was really lucky, because when I came in '98, the Vikings offensive line was stacked.
Yeah.
Todd Stussy, Randall McDaniel, Jeff Christie, Dave Dixon, and Corey Stringer. So
wow.
Yeah, you could look at any of those guys and take something from each and every one of them. It was also good for me because I didn't have to play right away. I wasn't ready to play. In this league that your film is your resume, and a lot of guys get thrown into the fire early because of necessity or because of injuries. And if you don't play well early on in your career, some teams, they see you have enough bad plays, and they'll just say, he's not getting it. And, they'll just kind of move on from you. You might get released, and other teams aren't really that excited to give you a roster spot because they feel like they've kind of seen what you can do. And they'll say, well, let's just take another young guy out of college and see if we strike gold with him. So, you know, I remember when I came in, Mike Tice, he gave me a lot of good advice. And one thing was, you watch Jeff Christie. You know, Jeff was an undersized guy. You know, in college, he played some running back. Played some tight end, and he was this undersized center. And so the Vikings kind of created this scheme where the center pulled around. But he said, look, you be like Jeff Christie. Sit by Jeff Christie in meetings. If Jeff writes something down, you write something down. If he asks a question, you ask a question. And my rookie year, I was actually roommates on the road with Jeff. And that was just extremely helpful to be able to see what it looked like, you know, to be able to see and be around the guy, a real pro. And I mean, literally, you know, to be sleeping in the same room with him on road trips, I could see everything that went into his preparation, and he was great at sharing stuff with me. So really helped me develop as a young player, and you know, eventually gave me a lot of confidence when my opportunity showed up.
Did you have to play in any of those games, like for Jeff, for a few snaps or a few series or anything in your rookie year?
My rookie year, my only meaningful contribution to the team, other than getting the guys water when they came off the field, and telling Randy Moss good job when he caught a touchdown.
Was moving my furniture. My son.
Here we go.
Was coaching my son's Little League basketball team.
Like Beetlejuice, Matt mentioned Mike Tice, and he appeared. He's the special guest I've been hyping up all week. It wasn't John Randall, which I know you said you have nightmares about, but man, what a really, really cool situation. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Mike. It's always fun to talk to you.
Well, I'm excited to be on with one of my idols, and a guy that I'm here at Canton, Ohio, working at the Hall of Fame, coaching some young offensive linemen, and I told him a Matt Birk story, and all they do is make fun of me for telling a Matt Birk story.
Yeah, they don't know who Matt Birk is.
I told them, no, they know who you are, my man. How you doing, son? And I told them that, hey, listen, you guys have a lot of the attributes that my man Matt Birk had when I worked him out coming out of Harvard. And he's from St. Paul. It was a local workout. And I knew that he had a chance because he had a great ass. And he had legs and a great ass. I said he didn't have an upper body, but he had, from Harvard, they didn't have a lifting program, so he had no shoulders, no arm strength, no chest, but he had a great ass. So these players walk around saying, hey, Matt Birk has a great ass. So they just make fun of me now. It's like, oh my God, I'm 61 years old. Is that what you guys are going to do, is make fun of me every day? What the hell? Where have I come? Where am I at in my career?
Coach Tice.
Volunteering.
Coach Tice, I mean, people have been making fun of you for more than just when you turned 61. They've been making fun of you for a long time, sir.
I love it. And you know what? If you can't make fun of yourself, and you can't take the poking, you know, as love. Maybe it's not all love, but you know what? The hell with it.
That's right. I'm not surprised to hear you.
Matty? How you doing, Matty?
I'm doing good, Coach. I'm doing real good. And Coach is right. You know, maybe the best thing I did was in the off season of my rookie year. Well, during my rookie year, Coach came up to me and he said, "Look, you know, my son Nate, you know, who's a man now, but back then I think he was 4th grade or 5th grade. He said, you played basketball. You got to coach my kid's team. You know, I can only show up once in a while because Coach is working insane hours. And he said, you got to coach them. You got to make sure the kids have fun and that they get better." And so I was like, "Yes, sir, Coach." And then in the off season, he was moving, and he said, "You got to help me move. I got some big furniture." I said, "Yes, sir, Coach." You know, he told me the more you can do, learn how to play guard, learn how to play tackle, coach my kids' basketball team, whatever it takes, the more you can do.
That's awesome.
And you know what the sad part is? It's actually true.
Well, my next 3 questions are actually about Matt's ass, so we can't do that now. That's been covered. What was the process like, Coach Tice, like with Matt? Did you know when you scouted him that you wanted him to move to center, and was that something that you guys discussed before he joined the team, if you had those interactions, or how early on when you joined the Vikings, Matt, were you kind of like, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing?
Well,
Well, it was.
I'll speak for what I was told, Matty, that Frankie Gilliam, and Matt knows this, the old head of scouting for the Vikings, pointed out Matt to me on film from Harvard. And back then, Matt, wasn't it called the Blue-Gray game? I think you played in the Blue-Gray game.
The old Blue-Gray, yeah.
Right, and so Matt had a rough week. He actually had a rough early week, and Frankie said to me, Frankie Gilliam, he said, don't worry about what he's doing early in the week. Just watch how he improves and how he finishes the week. And as the week progressed, Matt blocked everybody. Like nobody got by him. But early in the week, he struggled. But, as a smart guy out of Harvard and an athletic guy, has played basketball and other sports, he was able to adapt to the level of play at the Blue-Gray game. And what was that, 98, Matt? And he ended up blocking everybody later in the week and had a great game. And so we ended up, fortunately, we were able to bring Matty in for a private workout at the indoor facility in Minnesota because Matt was a local. He was in St. Paul and he was within the boundaries. And Matt had a great workout that day. I do remember him struggling a little bit at the end and sucking water out of the water fountain. Because he was a little gassed, but Scott Studwell and I looked at each other and went like, yes, and so that was my Matt Birk story.
so two things. One, yes. So the Blue-Gray game, I did struggle early in the week. The level of competition. I remember I got there, and there's guys from USC and Big Ten schools. I mean, I was used to playing Dartmouth and Princeton, so there's a little bit of like, whoa, this is the big time. But I got the call. I was home for Christmas vacation, and I remember I got home. It's 1997, so there's no cell phones, right? I got home from a workout. It's like noon. I'm sitting at my kitchen table, and my home phone rings. It's the only phone we had, and there's this guy with a Southern drawl, and he's telling me. He's from the Blue-Gray game, and they had somebody drop out, and he was asking the pro scouts, who do you want to see? And he said, we want to see that kid from Harvard. And I was like, wow. I was like, I'm going to go play in the Blue-Gray game. That was on Christmas Day. I mean, it was the only thing on Christmas Day. Like, the Blue-Gray game was kind of a big deal. And I was like, well, shoot, I'd love to play. How do I get there? And he said, he goes, I got you a plane ticket. I said, great. He goes, it's at 5:00 tonight. And I was like, wow. All right. And he said, oh, and you got to bring a sport coat and a tie. We got a dinner. I was home from college. I don't even think at college I had a sport coat and tie, much less at home. So I run out to a store, buy a blue blazer off the rack, jumped on a plane, and I get there the next day and practice starts. Well, I don't have any of my equipment. Oh. So one of the volunteers drives me. This is Montgomery, Alabama. So he drives me to a local high school, and it's literally like with a key, someone's there, opens up the equipment room to a high school, and I got a big head. Physically, I've got a big head, and I can't get any of these high school helmets over my head. The one I could was about 3 sizes too big. So wow. I go out to practice, and when I'm running, this helmet is like falling down over my eyes. I mean, this thing is not. I mean, these are the old days. So part of the reason why maybe I didn't block anybody early on because I was wearing like Dave Dixon's helmet. I was wearing Dave Dixon's helmet. And finally my equipment arrived, and I was like, well,
if you would have worn Dave's helmet, it would come down to your hips.
So, once I got my equipment, I was like, all right, this feels a little better. But then the other thing though, so then I went. So off of that, I get invited to the NFL scouting combine, and of course, I mean, I'm just like this whole thing is just an experience. But I know who Mike Tice is. I mean, because I was a Vikings fan, and and obviously the Vikings, and Mike sticks out in the crowd. He's 6'8". I was like, man, there's Mike Tyson. I interview with a couple teams. I don't interview with the Vikings. That's all right. I'm back at school,
We
and my phone rings in my dorm. Well, my phone rings in my dorm room, and it's Coach, and he says, "Yeah, I saw you at the combine. I'd like you to work you out." And he goes, "Look, there's nobody else in Boston that I want to work out, so you can come to our facility. It's within the rules. So you're going to save me a trip." And I said, "Well, yeah, great. I'm coming home in a month." And he goes, "All right." He goes, "Well, you know where our facility is. We're in Eden Prairie. I'll see you at 11 o'clock on this day." I hang up the phone. All right, guys. I'm from St. Paul. I'd never been to Eden Prairie. Back then, we didn't drive around like people. So, true story. I get out there. There's no GPS. I get out to Eden Prairie, and I'm on Viking Drive, but I can't find the Vikings facility. And now I'm getting nervous. Like, I'm going to miss my workout with the Minnesota Vikings because I'm going to be late. And I remember I pulled into this little strip mall, and I go into this salon. And I was hyperventilating. I said, "Do you guys know where the Vikings practice facility is?" And the woman there's she's like, "Just calm down, sugar. Calm down. It's just right down the road here." And I was like, "Oh, thank you so much." Went in there and worked out. And Mike, you did try to break me a little bit in that workout. You were trying to see.
I did. No,
Yeah.
I didn't try. I tried to break you, and I couldn't break you. But you were sucking
you almost
the water
broke me.
out of that water fountain.
Oh.
Yeah, but
And
know
the first
that's
time
what made it. Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I ever snapped a football was at the end of the workout. Mike said, "Yeah, I think you can play center." And Scott was there, and then Jeff Christie had come out of the weight room to watch. And the first time I ever snapped the ball was to Coach Tice during my workout. Just at the end, I just took a few snaps, and he's a college quarterback. He knew how to take a snap, and the first couple weren't very good. And you were saying, you gotta get up there and do it like this, and gave me a few pointers and snapped the football, and was exhausted and went home, and it's all history after that.
What about when we went over to scrimmage the Chiefs, and Denny and I were talking, and the next thing I said to you was, "Hey, Matty, go take some one-on-one live reps against the Chiefs at center." And you looked at me and said, "At center?" I said, "Yeah, at center." And you went, and not one guy could get by Matt. And Denny and I looked at each other and said, "Okay, Jeff Christie, who?"
Yeah. Well, do you remember who the nose tackle was for the Chiefs?
Who was it?
It was Chester McLaughlin.
Somebody with a name, right? Yeah,
Chester McLaughlin.
That was a big guy.
Biggest human being in the NFL. And so Chester was like, when Chester wanted to be, he was like kind of unblockable. And he was one of those guys. He was a vet, and he was wearing a visor. He'd have a visor, and then he'd just be out his knee with his helmet. And when he had to go take a rep, he'd take the visor off and just shove it in the back of his pants, and put his helmet on and go out there and destroy somebody. So I go out to center, and he takes his visor off, and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm literally fighting for my life. This guy could kill me. And so I think maybe he underestimated me a little bit, and I blocked him the first time, and then I could see him when you do one-on-ones, offense against defense, you always take 2 reps, right, Coach? You always take 2. So the first time I blocked him, and now I knew he was mad, and I said, "Oh boy," I said, this is going to take everything I got to block him the second one, because he's not. He was pissed that I blocked him, and I remember he came off that ball, and somehow, some way, I got him again, and then I remember I went back. I was like, I was more relieved than anything. I was like, thank God I'm still alive, because I thought I was going to die in River Falls that day.
Well, what you didn't know was Danny and I were low fiving over behind you, because we were pretty happy. We were like, yes. Well, I just wanted to come on and surprise you. I don't want to steal your thunder, but I wanted to say hi and let you know how much I love you and how much I appreciate everything you did for me in my career and made me a better coach. And just stay great, all right, buddy?
Hey, you know that's a two-way deal. Thanks, man. Love you.
All right, man. Be good. All right.
Later. Everyone should definitely check out Coach Tice's relatively new podcast slash YouTube show slash YouTube channel. If you Google Odds and Ends with Mike Tice, you'll find it, either the audio version on a bunch of different platforms or on YouTube. He has amazing guests. Obviously, he's very charming. He's just a great guy, and each week you can find it on VikingsTerritory.com. But you definitely want to stop by and check out that show, and we won't take up too much more of your time, Matt. But I whenever I'm a very offensive minded sort of guy. When I was, I was born in 1984. My dad used to call me Jesse Sapolo and teach me how to block all the time. That was like my first memories of life. I went to the University of Minnesota. I'm a big Ten guy. You mentioned going up against Big Ten guys at the Blue Gray game. This is kind of a story from a couple years ago that I wanted to get your insight on, that I'm not really sure how things have changed. But, there was a lot of talk about a crisis in the NFL in terms of finding offensive linemen because of of college football and zone spread offenses, zone offenses, that sort of thing, having smaller, lighter offensive linemen that can't really adjust to the NFL like you guys did back in the day, if you want to call it that. Is that something that you think is as prevalent as people have said? And beyond that, what are your thoughts on philosophies like the Vikings have of maybe lighter, smaller offensive linemen that can get to the second level in like a zone blocking scheme, but maybe not that aren't as great from a pass protection standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things. Crisis, it might be accurate or might be overstating it a little bit, but a couple things. It used to be you'd hear the word like pro style offense, right? So that kind of means the same thing as it did. But think about, college, the NFL gets the guys out of college, and college offenses, a lot of them have gone the way of this, spread, run and shoot, they basically, there's a lot of offenses in college that you really don't have to block. If you go 5 wides and you're running wide receiver screens and you're always in shotgun, that's a lot different than lining up in a power eye and trying to run ISO down the throats of a defense. And so I think, college adjusted, and the NFL is a little bit slower to change, their style of offense to fit what they were getting, the kind of guys they were getting from college programs. I think they've adjusted some now, but it's certainly different. There's a lot of offensive tackles in college that rarely ever get in a 3-point stance. They just don't. They're always running 3-4 wides, and so the pro game has evolved to fit that. But yeah, I think the other thing too is you look at, everybody's getting bigger, stronger, faster, but there's just some of these defensive linemen nowadays. I think of like a Khalil Mack, or when I was playing Javon Curse, he was called the Freak. These guys who are big and long, they're lean, but they still weigh 275, 280, and they're powerful. It seems like, some of the most freakish athletes. Everybody's kind of a freak athlete on a football field. Offensive linemen are just freaks. They're not freak athletes. They're just freaks. But, I think the defensive line, more so than any. You're just getting guys that they can do everything. They've got power. They've got speed. They can cover. They can run. They can do all those things. And so I think maybe the job description of an offensive lineman, or the number of skills that you have to have has increased, and so it's made the job a little bit harder. And there's just, I think there'll always be a premium to a certain extent on offensive linemen, because you need five play at once, and you're always going to have injuries. So you really need to have at least seven quality offensive linemen to be able to get through a season, because it doesn't matter how good your quarterback and receivers are. It's really hard to complete a pass when you're laying on your back. And so it's just the evolution of the game, and it's always, I know it's an old adage and people kind of dismiss it and it's not sexy and this and that, but Normally the team that wins the game is the team that wins the battle in the trenches, and obviously, offensive line is half of that, and it's just no matter how much you try to finesse it, it's really hard to hide an offensive lineman. You can't roll coverage to them, or you can't really design plays to that where he's a non-factor, because it's an offensive lineman is always in the mix, is always quote close to the ball, and you're going to be exposed rather quickly if you can't block.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that's one of the Achilles heel of these Vikings teams these last couple seasons is it's really come down to the offensive line. There's been a lot of frustration there. That's kind of what I meant by, I'm very focused on that. I mean, I've been talking about it on my other podcasts for years, and I scratch my head sometimes when I look at some of the moves that they make with the line, and I guess I obviously don't have the perspective that you do. I mean, I'm not asking you to bash what they're doing by any means, but I mean, what do you think their philosophy has been in regards to the line with moving tackles to guard, seemingly getting, I know they're strapped for cash right now from a salary cap perspective, but they seem to, whenever they get some semblance of depth, move away from guys like Elflein or Alex Boone, for example. I think things are finally looking up for the line for the first time in a long time. But I think, having obviously played the position, what do you think their goal is? Do you agree with it? Maybe from a scheme perspective or just from a team building perspective?
Yeah, well, let me say this. You don't need 5 great offensive linemen to have a great offensive line. I mean, it's really about how the unit comes together. And the zone scheme, which the Vikings run a heavy dose of, we ran that my last 2 years in Baltimore. You do need to be athletic. You need to be able to run. It's as funny as it sounds. You need to be able to run as an offensive lineman in that scheme. It's actually pretty tiring, because there's a lot of times you will run and sprint. By the time the linebacker moves and you're on your track, you're going to sprint 10, 12, 15 yards and then make contact with the guy because you're moving laterally, and it gets tiring. And so generally you're thinking, well, okay, you're going to have some guys that are a little bit smaller. Yeah, maybe that might be true. And I think generally speaking, when you construct your team, obviously the goal is to win the Super Bowl, but you have to build your team to beat the teams in your division. And so the Vikings want to go a little bit smaller and a little more athletic on the offensive line. Guys get to the second level, like you said, and cut off those linebackers. But you look at like the NFC North right now. I mean, there's some big physical D tackles, particularly in the division. Team Hicks, Kenny Clark, and so it's great if you look a little slimmer in the uniform and you guys are out there they're running, and when the zone scheme is blocked to perfection, it's a really pretty thing. Personally, I would just say though, I mean, I'll always take a little more strength and a little less athleticism, because football at the end of the day it's a physical game. Sooner or later, there's going to be that 3rd and 1, and you're not going to run zone on a 3rd and 1. You're going to run a dive, and it's just mano man whoop a man. And so maybe those matchups might not favor the Vikings necessarily all the time, but. I think it's more so just a function of that unit coming together, and there just they haven't found those 5 guys in the right positions that they can plug in and that unit consistently play at a high level. But they did insert Cleveland a couple weeks ago, and the offensive line has looked good. I mean, the biggest thing they've done is I watched kind of the line of scrimmage to see what happens, like who's moving who, and the Vikings have done a really good job of holding the line of scrimmage or actually pushing it back the last few weeks, and that's what you want. Move the down guys. If you never get to the second level, that's okay. If you're taking the down guys and putting them in the lap of the linebackers, that's just as good as blocking them, and I think the Vikings have the best back in the league as far as once he gets through the line, making the cuts, making linebackers miss, making safeties miss. He's got great vision, great speed, all those things. And so you don't necessarily have to be perfect. It doesn't need to be a work of art every single time, but you got to block the down guys first. Otherwise you got no chance.
And the last question for you, unless Wobby wanted to jump in, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask your opinion on Garrett Bradbury's game as a the Vikings took him in the first round. Uh, at least from PFF's statistics, he had a kind of a mediocre rookie year, which is to be expected. He's obviously come on a lot this season, along with that. I mean, Riley Reef is having a kind of a renaissance, and Ezra Cleveland's been better every week. Brian O'Neill is Brian O'Neill, and so yeah, I really wanted to get your opinion on his game. What in general, what you think. Uh, Propelled the Vikings to take a first round flyer on a guy like that.
Yeah, well, he's got all the physical tools. I mean, he's big, he's strong, he's athletic, and I don't know him that well, but just talking to people in the building and having met him, seems like a right way guy. Humble, respectful, hardworking, all those things. And so, yeah, I mean that. You have all those things. I think you can be a pretty good offensive lineman in this league. Like I said earlier on, very few guys are ready to play day one in the NFL. And I thought he came in last year and, at times looked great and at other times, took his lumps, which we all do in this league as young players, especially rookies. I mean, you get thrown into the fire and then, there's all the added noise around the team. And, when they struggle, right, they love to, we love to rail on Kirk Cousins and the contract and all those things. So, I mean, that's also part of being a pro, is realizing when the team doesn't perform up to standards. And, the fans always have very, very high standards, which they should. But, unless you win the Super Bowl, it's not good enough, which is fine. That's what you sign up for. But, that's all about being a pro. We're in college. I think a lot of times, again, I wouldn't know. I didn't go to a big time football program, but those guys are revered and almost worshipped on campus, right? And in the paper and by the boosters and all those people. So it's a different deal. I think you look at where Garrett Bradbury is on his career. I think he's taken a step from year one to year two, which is absolutely what you want to see. And I really do think that the sky is the limit for this guy, just because of his makeup and the tools that he has. And it'd probably be nice for him, be nice for everybody, but particularly for him too, if they can kind of settle in and he can play next to the same two guys at guard for an extended period of time, and they can have some success together. So I think all in all, things seem to be coming together right now, and obviously looks good for the team, but also for him personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing, just listening to you talk about that, Matt, the one last thing I have is just, especially when you have, I think, a coach and a coaching staff and a system that is been well established, like Kubiak and Dennison have. Sometimes it's just going to take a little bit for an offensive line to get going, but if you stick with them and you find the right five guys and you've got a back who can make people miss and a quarterback who will get rid of it on time, I think an offensive line can really get a lot better. As opposed to if you just got a really crappy population of corners who aren't athletic, or you really got a bunch of receivers who can't get separation, I don't care how many games you play. They're not going to get that much better, but I think an offensive line can over the course of the season. You know what I mean?
I absolutely. And I think what you're seeing now with the healthy Dalvin Cook is, right. It's sometimes, like early on this year, and I mean, you said it great at the beginning, Wobby, where, it's a week to week league. Things change so much week to week, much less month to month. And, early on it was like the Vikings, I look at the Tennessee game and the Seattle game. They did almost everything right.
Yeah.
And it was just one mistake. They could point to one mistake that cost them the game. It's like, man, you feel like we got to play perfect to just win a game. And you start to put pressure on yourself, and you start to play a little tight. And now what you're seeing is with Dalvin and Kurt going the way that they're going, you start to realize, boy, I don't have to be perfect. I can loosen up a little bit. And now the Vikings, I mean, shoot, against Detroit, you get 2 punts blocked and you still win by 14. You go to Chicago, you turn the ball over twice, and you give up a kickoff return, and you still win the game. And what that does for your confidence, I can't really understate it. You start to come up, you realize I don't have to be perfect. The worst thing you can feel as an offensive lineman, for anybody, but for an offensive lineman, is that I got to be perfect, because especially in the zone running game, it's all about takeoff and aiming points. You got to come off the ball as hard as you can and try to hit that precise aiming point in the middle of the guy's play side number or the outside of his number, or whatever it is. And if you think you have to be perfect, you're not going to quite come off as hard as you should, because you might be worried about a guy slanting or going up the field or whatever it is. And so I think that's what you're seeing now, is there's a lot of confidence with that group, and they're building on it from week to week. And there's going to be more bumps in the road. There definitely is. But now these guys know, they know they can always go back to these 3 games and, watch that film and say, hey, we know it's here. We know what we got to do. But feeling that you don't have to be perfect is really helpful for a team, and especially for a group that isn't super familiar playing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, man, I can't thank you enough for stopping by the show. It means a lot to us. This has been a really, really neat experience. I'm glad that we got Tice to surprise you. That was pretty cool. But yeah, I just thanks again for stopping by. You're always welcome here if you'd like to call in and rant about anything and everything. And we definitely appreciate you stopping by, man.
No, it's my pleasure, guys. Thank you very much, Joe. And Wobby, always good to talk with you, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Good talking to you too, Matt. We'll talk soon.
Later.
All right,
man.
guys. Be well.
All right. Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
He touched on something there too, I think, with this team in regards to building confidence and finding a center, I think, where they can go back to and say, we did play well in these games, and what has been different, assuming that maybe they have a rough spurt down the line, which hopefully they don't, because I feel like the margin of error for this team is very, very small at this point from a postseason perspective. They dug themselves into a pretty deep hole. Starting out 1-5, obviously, even with the expanded playoffs with 7 or 8 teams, depending on what happens with COVID. But I wanted to get your take, Wobby, on this team. I mean, where they're at, what you think their potential is for the rest of the season. I mean, obviously, really, if you look at the rest of the schedule, again, it's a week-to-week league and things can change. I think that the best example of that is Tampa Bay. I mean, one week they looked really, really good. The next week they'll look awful. I don't feel like there's a really clear front runner in the NFC right now. Maybe that would have been the Saints, but now Drew Brees is really injured. What their potential is, because I can't really find a team in the NFL in the last 3 weeks, especially as things have gone on, that it is as hot as the Vikings are right now.
Yeah, I mean, a few thoughts here, and I'll try and be quick with them. I was kind of on the Packers, Joe, as being that team who could maybe run away with some things in the NFC. But I don't think you can have that opinion right now after they lost at home to the Vikings. No disrespect to the Vikings, but I mean, the Packers.
That's the squeaker with the Jags.
Yeah, that didn't help either. But like the Packers had a chance to put the Vikings away for good at home. I mean, that would have been lights out, I think, for the Vikings, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it, and then I don't know, did they struggle? I kind of think they struggled to beat the Jags. So. Yeah, I think this is a tight race in the NFC. So that's sort of my feeling on who's going to run away with it in the NFC. I don't think anybody is. The Rams might be a pretty complete team, but I think there's a team in the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seed right now who's got as good a chance as anyone to make some noise in the NFC, and I'd put the Vikings in that mix. So that's where I'm at with the NFC. With the Vikings specifically, you and I talked about this, Joe, and we wrote about this and talked about it on the podcast. We knew, or at least I thought, this defense, I trust Zimmer. And it doesn't look the same because Waynes and Mack, Alexander, and Xavier Rhodes were gone, and Daniil wasn't playing, and Everson's gone, and Linval's gone. It looked different, but I trusted Zimmer. The foundation was there, and we're seeing that come to fruition right now. My frustration as I look back at opportunity lost for the Vikings this season
Yeah.
was early on in some of those games when Dalvin wasn't getting a bunch of touches, man. Like,
Yeah.
we talked about this. Why is Dalvin not getting the ball in his hands 30 times a game?
Yeah.
And the Vikings started doing that, and they started winning. I will say Justin Jefferson playing the way he did has been a nice surprise. But to me, the straw that stirs the drink is Dalvin. And why in the world it took a few games for the Vikings to start leaning heavily on Dalvin, I don't know. But I think they lost some games because of that, and now I think they're winning games because they realized it.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if they were a little bit worried about pitch count stuff with his injury history. And I mean, I think everyone that's is just waiting for that other shoe to drop. Unfortunately, it's like, okay, they've been consistently giving this guy 30 touches a game. Will he hold up? I think, to be honest, with the way his injuries have actually happened, those have all been non-contact injuries. Um, I think just because he's just so violent when he makes his cuts. He's so fast, powerful, and abrupt. I think sometimes, like Birk was alluding to, these guys are freaks physically, and sometimes your tendons can't keep up with your muscles. And so I don't necessarily think him getting tackled more is going to make him more injured. Granted, him getting the ball and making more cuts would kind of defeat that argument. Um, but yeah, I think that we've seen a blueprint as to how this team could make a legitimate run at this point, assuming they can make the postseason. I mean, feeding the ball to Dalvin, obviously, he almost got 100 yards, which is astounding considering how well the Bears defense was playing in that game. But the confidence of, the bye week and resetting for Cousins, who came out before the bye and said, if I keep playing like this, I'm not going to make it to the end of the season, contract or no. They limited his throws in Green Bay and Detroit just because Dalvin was beasting and they didn't need him to. But he really took the opportunity in Chicago, which is a Monday Night Football game, that worthless stat everyone held against him forever, which doesn't really tell you anything. And he put the team on his shoulder, something other people said he would never do. And he beat a team with a greater than 500 record, and he overcame a lot of things that typically in Soldier Field I think would be momentum killers or would flip the game. The Kyle Rudolph's his first fumble in his entire career. Adam Thielen for 2 quarters, forgetting that he had thumbs. The kick return for a touchdown, that punt return at the end of the game. The small things, even like the bad snap on the extra point. Those are all things that we're used to in Chicago that usually blow it for us. And Cousins kept coming back and showing that he's confident, he's a leader. You give this guy time. I don't care what everyone says about things need to be perfect around him. He has talent around him. You can't really be mad at him about that. But he delivers the
Mm-hmm.
ball to Jefferson in a way that, I'm sorry, Teddy Bridgewater never made those throws. And I think he deserves a little bit more respect since everyone, looks at Teddy as the second coming still and the one that got away. Cousins is doing things that I think he deserves credit for. And I've really, if you can't tell, I'm perturbed about it. And I've written about 3 articles in the last week about I don't understand why people that are our age who haven't had a quarterback start back-to-back 16-game seasons since 1978, who've always wanted a quarterback that wasn't 39 years old and about to retire, to come in and do things that Cousins has done. I mean, just objectively done. 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 picks in 2018. Last season, 26-6, gets Diggs his first 1,000-yard season, then 1,100-yard season, makes Diggs the best deep threat in the league, helps Justin Jefferson emerge as another great deep threat, so on and so forth. Everyone loves things about the team, but they keep trying to find ways to bend over backwards to remove Cousins from that equation, and I just don't think football works that way. I think everything's in football and in real life is a lot more nuanced than people online like to make it. Either, like Burke said too, you win a Super Bowl or you're trash. That doesn't work that way. So I just want to say that I think Cousins deserves as much credit for this turnaround as anybody does. And I'm very confident, especially with the way the offensive line is playing, that this team, with this remaining schedule, can really put together something special and do something that we're not used to them doing, which is, crawling out of a bad start. That's something the Packers
Yep.
used to do. So
Look.
that's
Yep.
my
Well,
rant. I always got a rant at the end of the show. You're used to it by now.
yeah. And here's the thing: week to week league. Um, And so I don't typically like doing this. I'm not trained to do this, being a team employee for 15 years, but I'm going to do it. Let's look ahead. Let's put the cart before the horse here, Joe, before we say goodbye to everybody. But I'm looking at the schedule and I'm seeing the next 3 games are at home. It's Cowboys, Panthers, Jags. I'm saying the Vikings are favored in all 3. Are
Yep.
you?
Yeah, and I don't
All
think
right.
Teddy's not going to play, so that yeah, for sure.
Okay, at Tampa, they're not going to be favored, but then home against Chicago, they're going to be favored. So I'm looking at a team that's going to be favored 4 of the next 5 games. And then, yeah, they have a tough one at New Orleans, but then they're going to play the Lions in the last game of the season. I
And
mean,
they've
at,
had the Saints' number too. You know what I mean?
yeah, so as dismal as things looked when they were 0-3 and they were 1-4 and then 1-5 losing to the Falcons, like you rip off 3 wins in a row, including one at Green Bay, and you got one of the best backs in the league and a streaky quarterback who's playing well right now. Like, let's see what happens. This defense is coming together, and I'm not saying there's no stopping the Vikings. All I'm saying is you can't write them off at 4-5 right now, especially
Yeah,
not this year when there's going to be 7 or 8 maybe playoff teams.
definitely. And I think it was actually kind of a cool benefit that we were off the last couple weeks because I remember the after Brian McKinney left and we were chatting, you were saying what you reiterated tonight, like trust Zimmer. And I remember
Mhm.
thinking, because you and I worked together, but we haven't worked together that long. We haven't done that was what the second episode, third episode of the show. So I didn't want to come out and be like, "What? Trust Zimmer? Why?" Like I was just so I was so angry and be pessimistic at that point. And being out for a couple weeks, it's completely different, And I think that one thing that I'm learning, because I didn't go to sports journalism school, I started Purple PTSD stereotypically from my parents' basement, uh, so on and so forth. And I've learned a lot through the years, and one of the main things that I'm learning this season is really a great example of it is to take it. It's a long season, it's a week to week season, not to make very stark declarative statements early because you never know what could happen. Every variable looked awful for the Vikings after the Falcons game. Everything looked bad. Every website
Yeah.
was writing about how we'll fire Zimmer. What are we gonna do? No coach will want to come in here. We got this albatross of a contract with Cousins, blah blah blah. And now everyone, it's just night and day. And I think that's a really good from my perspective, but that extends to people out on social media and everything. These guys are real people, as this show tonight showed. Calling for people to get fired isn't the coolest thing to do. It's reactionary, and I could have said 99% of me disagreed with you saying trust Zimmer at that point to the point that I almost threw up all over the place. But it's just funny how it's like, you know what?
Uh,
Wobby was right. Damn it. I wrote an article saying I was wrong. I like to hold myself accountable. That's what I'm doing now. I was wrong about Justin Jefferson and I was wrong about Zimmer. What he's doing with this units of third day draft picks, guys off of practice squads from the AFC, like just random guys, is astounding. I mean, he deserves every bit of credit that he's been getting. I think he should be the coach of the year if the Vikings make the playoffs, even though they usually give it to the team with a flashy record. It's just I think we all need to really just say, you know what? Yeah, let's give Zimmer credit. If there's a rough streak, a week or two from now, let's not all freak out about it. Let's just look at this thing as a whole and say we're on the right track, right? We're trending up, and that's really all you can ask for with this unit, and we're getting more than that. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride though, man.
it has been, and it's not over. It's going to get more interesting, and the NFC is wide open and very competitive, and it's like it always is. It's going to be fun to watch how it unfolds here down the stretch, and believe it or not, we are entering the final stretch of the season.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Well, as always, man, it's been really great chatting with you. I missed you these
Yeah,
last couple weeks. Let's remind everybody to check out VikingsTerritory.com, PurplePTSD.com for all of your Vikings news. If you can stomach any more of my ramblings, you can always check me out on Morning Joe's, a podcast I've been doing for the last 4 years with Joe Oberly, or on the BS show with Bob Sansevier every Tuesday. on radio stations across the northern part of the states. But this has been Three Deep with Wobby, and to a much lesser extent, me, for the 18th of November, 2020. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week with special guest Luke Braun of the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Nice.
Skol.